All right, let's talk another book. I just finished rereading. I bought it and I read it once, and I read it again just the other last couple of days to review it. I'm talking about the book Solaris by Stanislaw Lem. Now, this is one of those books that is supposedly like a science fiction classic. From the back of the book, long considered a classic, Solaris asks the question, can we understand the universe around us without first understanding what lies within? There's a quote here from Anne McCaffrey, a novel that makes you reevaluate the nature of intelligence itself. Now, the book was, I think, written in 1961. Let's double check that here. Copyright 1961, translation 1970. This is not, I don't get it. and having read it twice, I mean, it's not that I don't get what Lem is trying to do. I just think he's doing it very clumsily. It's basically, the concept is, what if a planet had a life of its own and tried to maybe make contact with humanity, but maybe not, kind of thing. Basically, there's this planet called Solaris. It orbits around a binary star system, and the only reason that the planet doesn't collapse into the binary stars is because of this ocean on it. The ocean basically covers the whole planet, and the ocean moves around in a way that kind of changes the gravitational effects of the planet so that the planet maintains a stable orbit. And basically the idea is that the ocean is some kind of life form that, is alive and, cognizant and conscious or something like that, but people don't have any way to actually communicate with it. There's a station that is kind of hovering above the planet, and not a space station, but like hovering a few thousand feet above the planet. There's some kind of anti-gravity, gravitors, I think is what Lem calls it. And the main character, Chris Kelvin, lands on the station only to discover that one of the three people who was on there has died, and suddenly there's a whole bunch of these, like, not a whole bunch, but each person is getting like a projection of their subconscious, basically 3D printed out, and it kind of follows them around and does that stuff. I mean, the idea is moderately interesting, but I don't think it's really that groundbreaking, is it? Even in 1960, right? Like, people were thinking about, what would, extraterrestrial life be like and how could it be different? They've been doing that for a long, long time. I mean, I feel like this isn't the first time that someone did that. I mean, realistically, if you think about what this is, it's a combination of Aliens, the Green Lantern, and Sigmund Freud, right? Because the things that come out aren't like what they wish for, or what necessarily their greatest desire. Sometimes they have some correlation with that, but in reality, it's left open ended as to, like, well, it could just be some kind of bizarre idea that you had in your head one day, and suddenly that's what appears to basically follow you around and watch you. And so it's basically like creation of like communicating human-like creatures that are based on a person's subconscious. And I feel like that's not that crazy, is it? I mean, like, there's some interesting exposition in the book about, like, people who've had different hypotheses about the planet, and what it actually means, and what it actually is, and whether it's alive or not, and what the things that it does represent, and whether people have had any contact with it. It turns out that these creatures only started appearing after they did basically a X-ray bombardment of the surface. And, like, it's never really made clear whether they represent the planet trying to talk to people or not, right? It's kind of deliberately left unanswered. They call it contact, and they say, maybe this wasn't contact, or maybe it was, and maybe we didn't actually say anything to anybody, so to speak. For a group of, I mean, and like, for the two characters that exist in this book, there's a third character, but he appears like twice and has like a few lines. He's locked himself in his laboratory, and nobody really tries to get him out of there. It's basically Chris Kelvin and Snow and the particular creature that is following Chris Kelvin around, which is basically the embodiment of a woman that he once loved who killed herself. It's even that is kind of cliche, right? Like, oh, this is the thing that you wanted more than anything. But then they kind of fog it up. Then Lem kind of fogs it up with the idea that, well, for him, it wasn't, for this other guy, it wasn't something that he had seen. It was just something that he had thought up one day. Probably, maybe, we don't know. We never really get outside of Kelvin's point of view. The whole story is told basically over his shoulder. And we never get any answers to what Snow and Sartorius's creatures are. We get a couple of very, very, very vague hints, and there's not really any development of either of those characters. The only character who develops at all is Chris Kelvin, and he develops in a very weird way, almost in a reverse way that you would imagine a normal person would, which is another thing that I find rather odd about this book. Okay, Chris Kelvin goes to sleep, he wakes up, his previous, girlfriend is in there, and he's like, he doesn't ask any questions, right? I mean, the whole, we come in peace thing has been a thing for so long that I feel like this couldn't have been the first book to investigate that idea, but the idea of being presented with a possibly, but possibly not intelligent, messenger, or maybe not a messenger from some other alien intelligence, the first thing you do is not to, basically put them into a suit and launch them out into space. Like, you would ask questions. You would say, well, what do you know? What do you think? And you'd have to be careful to avoid, falling into obvious lies or whatever. But at the same time, you'd be like, well, okay, are you hostile? Are you, have you been sent by the planet itself? Do you have memories that I have that you shouldn't have if you were a creation of, if you were a real copy, you would not know this, but I would know this. If you do know this, then that means that you're not a copy, you're a projection from my own mind, kind of thing. There is some of that, too. Rhea knows something that she can't have known because Chris Kelvin only met that person after she died. So, it's even pretty clear that she's just kind of a projection of what's inside his own mind. But nobody in this story acts normal about it. It's weird because there's these really long exposition dumps that talk about previous, scientific expeditions to explore or try to understand the planet. And, there's this one long thing of, this one guy who says he saw some things, but then he refuses to speak anymore. And he speaks to one other guy. And the guy's like, oh, he made me, give him an oath that I wouldn't report anything additional unless the council makes this particular decision. It's all very roundabout and kind of, I think, silly, honestly. These scientists are not acting like scientists. They're acting like someone has written scientists in name only. He is a cyberneticist, but he never does any cybernetic anything. It's not relevant to the story in any sense. Chris Kelvin has some specialization that's not relevant to the story. They never do any. Well, okay, so Chris Kelvin tries to measure the blood of the Rhea copy, and he tries to look at her blood under a neutron microscope, stuff like that. There is a little bit of that, but it's all very inconclusive and not very satisfying. The conclusion that he comes to is that she seems to be some kind of neutrino projection that's being moved around by magnetic fields that are being projected by the planet. But that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense either, because they were trying to measure them for so long. But if it was just a bunch of neutrinos that were being molded by magnetic fields, they would have measured the magnetic fields. A Gauss meter would have done that. They would have had to be rapidly changing. In order to shape something into a physical human shape, the magnetic fields would have to exist at a very strong projection, at a very close proximity to the creature. So, I mean, like, even that is just kind of like, wait, what? It's barely relevant, because the only thing that comes from it is that they figure out how to eliminate a neutrino thing, and there's this weird like point where they're like, well, it might blow up the station if we try to do that, and they're like, well, it just doesn't. And they don't even have really an argument over it. They just talk about the possibility of having an argument over it, and then like then Rhea gets neutrino annihilated off screen. Basically, it's very weird. There's these ridiculously long segments of just like plain, pretty boring exposition where it's just talking about like the historical aspects of studying this planet, and some of it is interesting, some of it, but it goes on for so long that you're like, what point are you trying to make here? Because if Lem wanted to talk about the possibility of a global scale intelligence that is so foreign to humanity that it couldn't even understand us if it tried, right? Then he could write a monograph about it, or a short story, or a novella. This is a short novel, but it's packed full of nonsensical character interactions, scientists who don't science, and exposition that serves no significant purpose. Again, I find it very strange that there's these creatures that appear that represent things that are in their minds, and they're clearly being created by the planet, right? Like there's nothing else that could have made them. And yet they have these weirdly hostile reactions to the creatures. When if their purpose here was to study the planet of Solaris, the possibility of like something being projected to you from the planet that can interact with you is like, that's a huge deal. That's like, oh, this is something that we can use maybe to talk and maybe exchange some information with the planet. And if not, at least we can figure out whether the planet sees us as hostile or whether we should see it as hostile. Kelvin's first reaction to the first Freya appearing is to launch her out into space. Then the second one, he has the development that basically he kind of gives up and falls in love with the Freya projection, and that's kind of the rest of the story. Even that's not very satisfying because it's not reasoned out in a significant way, and we get these tiny little hints of what Snow and Sartorius are seeing, and we see what Gibardian was seeing, but nothing ever really comes from that. It's basically just in there for like, what the hell kind of moment. It's weird because supposedly these are people who want to study Solaris, who are well-educated and knowledgeable in scientific processes, and none of them actually proposes any kind of systematic approach that could maybe lead to renewed scientific interest in the planet. Nobody tries it. The people are talking past each other all the time. Or what I'm trying to say is like the idea that like intelligence, an alien intelligence would be different enough from us that we wouldn't be able to comprehend each other is not a groundbreaking idea. Regular human beings in like plain old arguments talk past each other all the time. This is just an extension of that. If your existence is so large or collectivized or cellular or whatever that you can't even comprehend the idea of a human being's thought processes, that's not something that I feel like is that innovative, especially in 1961. I don't know. The thing about it, right? The thing I love about science fiction is first off, futurism, right? The idea that someone is trying to think of something, the way that things are in the future, right? And they're like saying, well, what if this is the way that things went, or what if this is the way that things went? And people frequently get it wrong, but it's still okay to get futurism wrong as long as it's interesting wrong, right? This book doesn't really have any futurism in it. Everything is kind of like stuff off that you would see off the shelf maybe not commonly in the 60s, but like, you know, televisions, an electron microscope, a computer. These are all things that kind of existed when the book was written, and there's not really any like amazing innovation that's hypothesized by Lem, right or wrong. It's just like, well, we have a computer and it can compute this thing to 5 digits. I'll compute it to 4 digits, and if the 4 digits match, then it can't be a hallucination on my part. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's something they try in the book. It's not just an electron microscope. We have a neutron microscope. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. Neutrons don't react strongly with a lot of particles because they're neutral. They don't have a charge. And so, I mean, I guess you could maybe get something out of the strong nuclear force for collisions, but the chances of that are very, very small because those cross sections don't matter. Okay, whatever. It's, I don't know. It's mildly interesting to read. You don't come away from the book with like any cool new ideas. There's no sense of wonder. That's another thing I like about science fiction, is like some kind of wondrous thing, like, holy cow, we've discovered this thing. Nobody's really trying to discover anything in this book. We get some discussion of discoveries, but they're all in the distant past. They're all in these exposition dumps where it's like, this guy discovered this, and this guy observed these things, and he determined that this was doing this, and yada yada yada. But the characters don't actually discover anything except that the things are neutrinos and how to get rid of them. And even the getting rid of them doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know. I bought this book because I kept hearing that it was so great, that it was such a classic of science fiction. And like, the first time I read it, I wasn't impressed. And the second time I read it, I still wasn't impressed. I feel like either I'm missing something big, or like the second half of the book wasn't included, or, whatever. It's just not particularly intriguing. There aren't any particularly new or interesting ideas. There's no sense of wonder, and there's no futurism in it. So it's kind of just, and there's not even any like good characters or interesting plot points. It's a very bland book, and I can't figure out why. Because like, I'm looking at the list of books by Stanislaw Lem, right? And we have. So Solaris is one of them, of course. But let me read some of the other titles of his books. The Chain of Chance. That might be kind of cool. The Siberiad. That might have some cool futurism in it. Eden. Okay, so we're doing kind of a biblical thing where we're talking about, who knows, right? Fiasco. That sounds like some kind of adventure story or something like that. The Futurological Congress. Okay, that might be another one that is a little bit exposition heavy, but there could be something cool about that. Some kind of futuristic idea of how law has to evolve. Maybe there's something cool there. High Castle, A Remembrance. That sounds like some kind of historical book, or like a fake history. Maybe that could be fun. His Master's Voice. That title was used in an advertisement for something, and that's where I know that phrase. But maybe there's something cool there. Some kind of computer-human interaction thing that's kind of interesting, right? Hospital of Transfiguration. Okay, transhumanism stuff. Maybe that's kind of neat. Maybe it ends up being kind of boring. Who knows? Imaginary Magnitude. Okay, so now we're thinking about like imaginary numbers. Maybe there's something going on that like phasing reality or something. That could be cool. The Investigation. Okay, that's not a very good title, but I like detective stories. I like science stories. The Invincible. Memoirs Found in a Bathtub. No. Memoirs of a Space Traveler. Okay, that could be cool. It might be a little bit kind of dull, but it could be cool. Micro Worlds. Okay, like a inner space kind of thing, maybe, or who knows. More Tales of Perks the Pilot. That sounds like it sounds a little childish, but maybe it's cool. Mortal Engines. That sounds like it could have been a Terry Pratchett title. 1 Human Minute. That sounds pretentious. A perfect vacuum. Okay, maybe there's something interesting there. Return from the stars. Okay, someone goes out to the stars and something happens, and they come back, and then something interesting happens. That could be cool. Solaris. The Star Diaries. Okay, could be kind of dull, but maybe there's something there. And then Tales of Perks the Pilot, which for some reason they arrange these alphabetically and not like in order of writing. Anyway, I don't know. This is a book that is stated to be a classic by the authorities. I do not understand why it is such a classic. It doesn't seem to have any new ideas in it. It doesn't seem to have any good, like, literary aspects to it. It seems to very clumsily handle a combination of a couple of ideas that are already well known at the time that it was in writing. It has no sense of wonder. It has nonsensical characters. It doesn't provide any of the answers to even the things that might help you figure out what the hell Lem is trying to get at. It has no significant futurism, and it's two people talking past each other only on a species scale and not an individual scale. I don't know. If you want to read some Stanislaw Lem, you can read Solaris, but I just read out a bunch of titles, and you might want to find something that sounds a little bit cooler. Out of the ones that are there, the Siberiad, Hospital of Transfiguration, Tales of Perks the Pilot, and maybe A Perfect Vacuum sound the most interesting to me. Maybe I'll check out one of his other books later, but this one did not wow me as much as I expected to be wowed by it. In fact, it didn't wow me at all. Anyway, that's what I've got. It is Friday, so I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll get back to some more literary stuff next week, and we'll see what happens. Anyway, have a good weekend, and I'll see you later.